Two Truths and a Lie, the series that looks at real life issues and picks apart what's true and what's not. Welcome back. I'm Gila Ross, host of the Power Up podcast, where we cut through the chase and talk about real things that can impact and upgrade our everyday lives. Welcome. I'm very, very excited today that we have with us Dovi Halpern from the band Hashem's Warrior, and he's going to tell us more about the band.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. So just to kind of give the quick background. So I am, you could say, a Baal Teshuva, meaning someone who literally returned. I grew up in a religious home, didn't really feel it in my own way. So just honestly wasn't that bought in for most of my childhood, even from when I was very young.
So you grew up religious, and then
Yeah.
you kind of went away from that, and then you ended up in Israel, or
Yes.
Okay. I feel like there's a story here.
The basic is that I think I grew up with parents who themselves had become religious.
Right.
And despite the fact that they were very, and I have to acknowledge them for being very supportive, loving, caring, always there for me, parents, I think one thing I did not pick up is their zeal and enthusiasm for religion. In a lot of ways, I felt like I grew up on an island, meaning, we live in a secular culture, and growing up Orthodox, you look different, and that's a choice, and so I didn't really understand why I had to be different. Like when I'd go to family functions, we were the religious ones, so I was the one who had to wear kippah and tzitzis, and I just really didn't understand why am I distinguishing myself to look different, and it just was embarrassing. I remember at a very young age just going out in public, supermarkets or this or that, like my father having to nudge me to put my kippah back on, and I'm talking from a pretty young age. And so I think that a takeaway that I've had, and just kind of in growing up, and I went to religious day school and middle school, and high school was more modern Orthodox. But I had functionally a K through 12 Orthodox education that didn't really light any sparks in me. It was really the fact that I know a lot. I had a connection with Israel. I know a lot of folks from my high school, from my yeshiva high school, would go to Israel or seminary after high school. So that was just it. I just kind of saw it as a natural, like, yeah, I'm gonna go to Israel, and then I'll go to college. Like, that was just kind of the route that I followed. And
but at this point, were you religious when you went to Israel? No, right.
No, I would say maybe halfway through high school, I just kind of, it was a slow process, but I think it just, once I had friends who weren't keeping kosher, I wasn't keeping kosher. It was just like, there was no really reason that I was holding on to things like that I found.
And were your parents, how did your parents react?
Obviously not thrilled.
Right.
Not thrilled. But I have to give credit where credit is due, that I think that I never, as much as my parents didn't approve, I never felt as a person rejected by my parents.
No, when a kid follows a different path, it's difficult, right? In whatever way it is, right? Like, if you have a child that you want to go to university and be educated, and they take a different path, it's a disappointment. So I think, without judging anyone, I think we can, as human beings, we can sort of relate to that. But you said you didn't feel rejected as a person.
Yeah, I think there's a quote by the Baal Shem Tov where a chassid brought his son to the rabbi and said, "Rabbi, like, what do I do? My son is just, he's not into being religious. He's not into Judaism. What should I do?" To which the Baal Shem Tov says, "Love him even more."
I love that.
Yeah, and I think that's I think a perhaps a truth that throughout all of life we should embrace is that really um, you don't things don't really ever improve by pushing things away. It's really or sweeping things under the rug or pretending they don't exist. I think really, especially with family relationships, even if people are going in different directions and it's not always comfortable, I think to just kind of have a line established of just caring about the person and that's understood beyond you can care about the person and disapprove with their actions.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that probably also gave me some sort of a rope to grab back onto when I was starting to, you could say, get a spark ignited when I was in Israel in finding my own path back. I think that there was something that I was interested in coming back to in an environment that I was never really not accepted in the first place, though it was just kind of that itself made it more natural
Right.
as well.
Um, so what happens? I mean, as a parent, I really love that quote, like, because I think it's so true. Forget about it. Even if you have little kids, like when they mess up, you gotta love them even more, right? And it's the same when they're older, when they mess up, you gotta love them even more. Tell me what happened when you were in Israel.
So I went to a yeshiva called Ner Yaakov,
Yeah.
Ner Jake, also known as, and I think that it was a real metamorphosis for me. I kind of came in, I knowing knowing one person and in a school of about like basically 100 kids in a dorm of 100 kids, my age 18, 19, 20 years old, and I really was at a point in my life where I had a blank page, and I really I didn't have, when you're, especially I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, so it's a small town,
Right.
smaller Jewish community. People know you in a certain way, and there's a lot that is just, whether it's baggage or just unconscious ways of being that can just trickle in. Like one thing that I would relate to was, as I am working on myself and trying to grow as a person based on kind of the route that I took in yeshiva, coming home was always a struggle, just based on, you could say, old dynamics with siblings or this or that, or with friends. That's to transform yourself in one scenario takes a certain amount of where you have a blank page, but to bring that transformation to scenarios where you're already maybe typecast in certain roles, like that's really where a lot of the work really begins in personal growth. But what I think lit the spark for me was just being in an environment where, frankly, it was that I could go out and party at night, and then when I wake up in the late morning or afternoon, there's just rabbis in the base waiting to learn, and it was just really all that there was to do. And I think it was just for someone like myself who was just not really buying it. I think was able to get out of my system what I needed to get out of my system, and was also at the same time able to start just kind of a path of personal growth and finding personal connections to parts of Judaism, like the lifestyle, prayer, learning. That's another story that took a lot longer to connect with Gemara and stuff like that. But I think that there's a lot of facets of Jewish life that really, first off, as a teenager who is just apathetic, because teenagers are apathetic, you
Yes.
can't really like point a strong finger at my high school and say, what the heck is wrong with you? You didn't really inspire me. But I can look back at my high school and I can see, the kind of rabbi that inspired kids at my high school he was a rebbe. He just like having fun with the kids. And I think that was, his class was a good time.
Like, what did Israel have that high school didn't? Without going into whatever was with high school, but like, what was it in Israel that sort of like lit that spark for you?
Yeah. So I think it was, well, I guess it was kind of exactly this, was that it was an environment of rabbis that were, frankly, um, I guess, just fun to be around, cool
Right.
guys, like young guys. And I think that, you know, in a lot of a lot of the childhood education is, who is Judaism? Judaism is represented by the authority figures in your life. And if you're not so into that, and you're not a, you know, a rule follower, then Judaism feels like something that's being pushed down your throat, even if that's not necessarily the case. And it's more so like, you're a kid that goes to school, you got to follow the rules, you got to go to you don't go to davening, you have to have a siddur open, and you know, like, but it translates to an apathetic teenager as like, what the heck, like, why are you making me do this stuff? Whereas in Israel, I wasn't forced to do anything. I was not
Right.
forced to do anything. But when I did do something, there was an environment of, you know, just honestly, socially, rabbis that were wise and fun and interesting. You know, there was a rabbi there who was like a bodybuilder and like all sorts of backgrounds, former soldier, former rapper, like really just like a real eclectic um, group of rabbis. I literally had, I think for 100 kids, they maybe had like 30 rabbis on staff. So I got to hand it to
Wow.
them. But the idea was to really have it so that every type of kid going through whatever they're going through, and just at whatever level they are in life, could find someone that they could connect to. And so I think more than anything, I think there's the social connection of having just a rabbi who you can call a friend, as something that will inevitably, I think, bring people closer to Judaism. Inspiring classes are one thing, and they're great, and that's what really lights the fire. But I think to even just start, you know, what's the word, like to stoke the fire, stoke the sparks of the fire, you need to have a reason to even want to have a conversation with the rabbi in the first place. And I
Right.
think that step is just to have a rabbi in your life who is someone who you want to be around. And I
Right.
think that is not necessarily something I also had growing up. You know, does that answer your question?
It does, and I relate to it a lot, especially that point where you said about authority. I remember one of my principals once telling me that I have a problem listening to authority, and one of the things that perhaps because of that, I've never really put the two and two together, is that I also grew up religious, and I'm really passionate. Like, people say to me, because I work a lot with Jews from all across the affiliation, right? Like religious, non-religious, you know, new to Judaism. And a lot of times they're like, oh, so you're religious, so you just went along with it. And I think what I believe is that no matter how religious you are, at some point you got to find that relationship with God, because at the end of the day, Judaism is not a religion, right? Like, it's not a set of rules. It's a relationship with God, and a relationship isn't something that you can just like sort of inherit and do. It's a relationship, is you got to invest in it, right? And you know, you got to have that pathway where you can sort of develop your own relationship. And it sounds like, you know, that the framework of having those relatable rabbis in the classes and allowed you to sort of find that your own pathway to your relationship with God. Is that some of behind the reason behind your band's name? I'd love to hear more about
Hashem's
that.
warrior, right? Your initial question, which you've been a bit roundabout here, but
Yeah.
so first off, I'll just acknowledge that, you know, the relationship aspect, you hit the nail on the head. That, I mean, like, that's it. And I think that even, yeah, the idea of coming closer to God is, you know, the relationships in your life of people who also are striving for that, and surrounding yourself with that type of environment. But, you know, the name Hashem's warrior, I think, really comes from perhaps a mindset that I unconsciously, for most of my 20s, I'm 32. So for most of my 20s, I felt like that was the mindset that I felt like was really like my thriving mode as a Jew, was being in this mindset of being Hashem's warrior. And what that means is being someone who understands that you know, we say every day in davening, "Hamachadesh b'tuvo b'chol yom," like Hashem renews the world every day. And to go deeper, and we don't need to go on this whole tangent, but there's a Matrix movie coming out in a few months, actually in about a month. And if you Google Kabbalah and the Matrix, your mind will be blown on just like how much Judaism there is embedded within Judaism, the actual idea that like every moment is a coalescence, is that a word, of Hashem's intention, and of even, you want to get more mystical, of different permutations and variations of Hashem's name, in kind of as emanations of how a reality occurs for our universe. And so, at the end of the day, if one can really own and embody a mindset of like, I'm actually here as a soul, as as a soul, as an emanation, as literally a spark of God, or as Rabbi David Aaron describes it, as if Hashem were the sun, we would be rays of his shine. And so the idea that like literally I have something, I'm literally like an agent for God here, put here for an opportunity to bring some sort of rectification and healing to this world. And that's really the ultimate, I think, goal of Judaism, is tikkun olam. Probably one of the most famous across all or religious affiliations, the most famous mitzvah, tikkun olam. I mean, that's what it's all about, is at all levels, whether it's doing charity work, whether it's doing certain mitzvos, or the Kabbalists say l'shem yichud, they say this mystical whatever it is, prayer before they do a mitzvah, so that acknowledges what I'm about to do. This mitzvah is for the sake of the tikkun, for the rectification of this universe. And that's what our world is, the world of action, the world of being able to choose intentionally and be intentional. And ultimately, I think that's, Hashem's warrior is about just being a warrior throughout the challenges in everyday life, whether it be just having a lot going on, being stressed at work and at home, feeling overwhelmed, and dealing with the symptoms of that, whether it's anxiety or depression or whatever a person might be going through, to really bring your game face. And I think also I used to wrestle on my high school's team. So I think in a lot of ways, this is a mindset that I just kind of had to learn in general, was just like, just having to be tough and power through the face of adversity. And just kind of as an athlete, I think that mindset in a lot of ways came carried through into my ability to be resilient as a, single, newly religious Jew in my 20s, which is not an easy road to necessarily navigate, especially when you could say most of my old friends are just not religious. So really, in a lot of ways, starting over. And so, yeah, I think just circuitous answer short, I think for me, what it means to be Hashem's warrior, and the reason I call this music project, which is about heavy metal, which is really a project that was inspired by the words of Tehillim, which were very much about, I think, being Hashem's warrior. What is Tehillim? Tehillim is about David Hamelech, King David, talking through his very specific different trials and tribulations that he was going through in life in a poetic way, and ending with kind of positive affirmations about who Hashem is, who God is to him in his life. And, I guess and ultimately, God, I'm in your hands. And, and God, you're my rock. And so that was really the inspiration for my music, is actually reading the poetic words of Tehillim. I think this is some epic stuff. Like this reminds me of like the heavy metal I used to listen to in high school. And frankly, I didn't listen to heavy metal in probably 10 years, but I just kind of had this spark of inspiration, like, hey, I feel like perhaps I have enough of a background to write lyrics like this that are similar to Tehillim, that sound like heavy metal lyrics, and perhaps add in some sort of positive takeaway where that would actually be really relatable to anyone who's going through any challenge in life, Jewish, non-Jewish, whatever, religious, non-religious, being able to just like have real vulnerable talk and lyrics about like the struggle of mental health, and the positive, spiritually and emotionally reinforcing aspects of turning to Hashem and turning to God amidst those struggles, and doing so in a healthy way.
That's amazing to hear, because I don't think I've ever really heard it phrased that way before. But you're right. Like if you think about it, right, you hear about Tehillim and you might know it, you might not know it, you might think of it as something that's like you put off a bookshelf and you say, if God forbid you know someone that is sick. But it's incredible how you're saying, like, when you actually read the words, it's like such a tool for resilience for whatever we're going through in our modern day life. And you're right, King David went through some crazy stuff, right? If you know his life history, his it did go he went through crazy stuff, and yet he sort of had that maybe his resilience was because he trusted in God as his rock. That's wow,
I think,
it's a really amazing perspective to hear.
yeah. Well, so and I think just to perhaps embellish on that just a little is, like you mentioned, most people, I think, how they relate to Tehillim, how they know Tehillim is like when someone is sick and there's something going on in the world, like Tehillim is what we turn to in times of tribulations as basically an entreaty to God to be able to encourage or to request a positive outcome, or something of that nature, right? Now, I think to, perhaps humanize Tehillim a little bit more, maybe, which is perhaps what we can do here today, is that these are like our ultimate prayers. When something is like really wrong and something is really bad and there's a situation that is dire, we turn to Tehillim. And so I think it's fair to say that, King David, who wrote Tehillim, the Psalms, he is like the ultimate pinnacle of what prayer is. Like this book that he wrote of prayers, like these are the ultimate prayers that we have as the Jewish people, that this is what we turn to when we really need something. And I think to perhaps put ourselves in the shoes of King David, as he was someone who went through stuff in his life, as we are people who each individually go through whatever we go through in our own lives, we can see that the ultimate role model of prayer in Judaism was somebody who reacted in his situations through communication with God. Through, by the way, not saying, like, King David will say, stuff like, it's not, doesn't say the words, it's not fair, but he will say things that, like, he gets it off his chest. He will say things that some, at the start of Tehillim might sound sacrilegious. It always ends with Hashem, ultimately, you're the one I trust. But I think that there's something to be said for, not just pretending like, I can't really talk about this with God. Like, I can say, God, I know what you're putting me through is hard, but no, it's like, vent to God. Like, God, Hashem is here and putting us here for a reason at the end of the day. But before you can get to that part, just like we have stuff that is causing an emotional blockage that we need to get off our chest, and Hashem is here to listen to that. And I think that that's what David HaMelech does. And I think that is something that, Judaism up until this day, with our formalized system of prayer, has done the work of preserving our tradition to this day. But what I think has perhaps been forgotten is the private and personal and individual path to a relationship with God. And I think that that's what Sefer Tehillim is a perfect embodiment of
Right.
someone going through their struggles in life, and of King David going through those struggles and using those struggles as a springboard to, like you say, what's the like relationship, and what's the fundamental of a relationship? Communication.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, it's true. Is there any particular part of Tehillim that really like struck you or stood out to you?
I think the one that really was the impetus for this project was, I believe, Tehillim 27, the one that we say the month of Elul, daily, kind of leading up to the high holidays. And it's just, it's about, Hashem. uh and then probably the most famous, or memorable part, at least for me, is just it's pretty strong words, where it's like, my father and my mother have forsaken me, and whereas you, Hashem, have always, are always here for me. And I think there's just a lot of language of like, I cannot trust like the institutions of this world, whether it's parents, whether it's this or that, which, like, hey, I love my parents, so I'm not saying anything
Right.
But I think that the messaging there and a lot, and just that resonates throughout the whole thing, is that like Hashem and Hashem is the one to whom we can only really pure, in the its most pure form, just like put over our complete trust. And I was going through a period of in my life where I was just feeling like very disconnected, spiritually numb. And so my first song, which kind of was I think in a lot of ways inspired by this Tehillim and written in the mode of Tehillim, whereas like the verse is basically bemoaning, the problems of life, specifically the problem of I don't even know how to connect to you, God. Like that's really the theme of the song is my heart calls out in the darkness, the verse ends with wishing I can connect the dots between how I feel and what I do. I was just feeling in a place where I wanted to be connected with God, but like I wasn't there. Right. And so the chorus is, guide my footsteps from this war, and ends with the words, from this war, please Hashem, lift me up today. And I think what I tried to make it was just an authentic entreaty to God, very similar to what King David does in Tehillim, that would just, be a bit rock and roll and, could perhaps dramatize, bring some life and power, like literal power to the experience of just struggling to feel connected spiritually. And so does that answer your question?
Yes, no, it does. And I think it's interesting that you picked up on that like my father and my mother have abandoned me, because I think like if you try and imagine for a moment like the pain of a child, or however old the child is, a child or an adult that has not got a relationship with their parents, who feels abandoned from their parents, it's like it's a very unique kind of abandonment, a very unique a very strong type of pain. And it's emotive, and King David is saying that, like, even though that's how deep my pain is, at least I have you, right? And it's like kind of that thing, that like that resilience, right? That no matter what we're going through in life, like at least God is a rock that we can turn to. And I think it's really amazing that you're doing this music and you're bringing that messaging out to people, because we need it nowadays, to hear those messages. People, there's a lot of struggles in the world, and we can connect to God, right? As through the ups and through the downs, and even when we're feeling like we're feeling like we can't, like that feeling that you said, that like you weren't feeling it, but you still wanted to feel it, which is sometimes the best that we can hope for, right? That's the connection that we are at least wanting to want it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, this is an incredible conversation. Amazing to hear your like story, how you went from disengaged, apathetic, or less, and here you are now, in your own words, Hashem's warrior. Amazing.
I think that it's been a surreal experience. I've, for most of my life, not considered myself a musician. It's funny, when I went to yeshiva after Israel, I did not know if I was going to become religious. So what did I do? I brought a keyboard with me. That was my fallback. If I don't become religious here, I'm gonna figure out how to play this. And so it's just kind of I think you'd say a certain degree of hashgacha. And so in a lot of ways, it's funny that it's just kind of, it's come full circle here, in that I am able to use 13 years later my keyboard, as well as the life experiences and inspiration that I've picked up along the way, to kind of meld them together in a way that is able to hopefully share some of that experience in a way that's able to motivate others in the same way that it has motivated myself.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciated talking and having this conversation with you.
Likewise, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for taking the time to listen. I'd love to hear if this resonated with you. You can get in touch with me on Instagram,
It's Gila Ross. And please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful day.